One thing that a lot of people struggle with in digital media pricing is understanding how the prices for advertising move over time. And this is because a lot of the pricing is opaque. Unlike in consumer goods, where you can just look up the price in a search bar, the price for digital media is fragmented. It's non-transparent, and often it can vary from one buyer to another. So, what do you do if you're in a pricing or yield management team and someone, either your boss or the head of sales, comes to you and says, I saw last month that the pricing yield for our company was flat on our advertising. How does that compare to the industry? I used to hate this question because usually the person asking it wants a simple answer. They don't want to hear it depends on what format that you're talking about, or it depends on what you consider the market, or it depends on who you consider our competitors. So let's set that aside, but talk about the big buckets. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of 4 different sources of information that you can turn to for thinking about how prices are moving over time. The first is the measurement and ratings companies. The companies I am going to list are not necessarily going to like the fact that I'm grouping them together, but I'm going to do that anyway. And here we're talking about companies like Nielsen and comScore. They are traditionally companies that would look at audience counting, things like the number of users on a site or on a channel, or how much time the users spend on those sites. However, over time, they have expanded into other areas, including those related to revenue and pricing. Now, there are also other companies that are more specialist companies, and here I'm talking about companies like STAQ or Pathmatics. These tend to be small companies, and they specialize in getting deeper into the dynamics associated with pricing of individual ads. And so there are different companies, but regardless of the company that you're looking at, there are a few things that you need to be careful of when you're using these sources. One is that they may be strong in one region, but are not in others. And this is traditionally true where they may be strong within the US, but not as strong internationally. They may be strong in one format, for example, digital banners, but not as strong in native ads or in video. They may be good on one dimension. For example, I mentioned counting of impressions, but bad in another area where you need for pricing. For example, the revenue side of the equation. Or they may rely on small samples of data. For example, consumer panels or some sample of impressions. So when you're evaluating these different companies, you need to ask yourself all of these types of questions. In my experience, and again, this is just an opinion, the large measurement companies like comScore and Nielsen are very good at counting ad impression data, but they are generally much good and much less reliable in looking at things like pricing trends. And that is because the information they have about the revenue is less reliable. The smaller companies that are focused on pricing, like STAQ and Pathmatics, could provide some interesting pricing trending data, but you have to accept that they don't have the same footprint as a company like Nielsen and comScore, and they don't have insight into the dynamics around make goods, bonuses. In other words, there are areas where they can't be relied on. So in summary, for bucket 1, which is the measurement companies, their strength is that they're potentially a reliable and consistent form of data. The weakness is that they often have systematic biases that the user is not aware of. Basically, you have to work with the measurement and pricing vendors, and you have to work with at least 1 or 2 over time consistently, but you're going to find that they are not perfect, and you're going to have to explore other sources to buttress that information. So let's turn to what I'm going to call source number 2, and that relates to the earnings of public companies. Here we're talking about companies that have quarterly or annual reports that public companies issue. For example, some companies in the advertising business, that will be their main line of business. So you can look at aggregate reports. It will give you a good indication on how their advertising business is changing over time. Unfortunately, for some companies that we might be interested in, for example, a Microsoft or an Amazon, their advertising or their search business may just be one line of business. So their ability to see what is going on in advertising may be limited. For context, I'm recording this in 2024, and over time, the companies that I'm going to mention may change, but the themes are going to remain the same. For example, if you are interested in native ads, you are going to scrutinize the earnings reports of companies like Taboola and Outbrain. If you are interested in retail media networks, you're going to look at companies like Amazon and Walmart. If you're interested in search, you're going to look at Google and Microsoft. If you're interested in general ad tech, you're going to start with the Trade Desk and some of the independent SSPs like Magnite. But in general, if you're looking at industry trends, you're going to start with Google. So let's look at the commentary in those quarterly and annual reports, and we want to start looking at changes and trends. So here's just one table from their latest earnings report. This table shows that they experienced very different dynamics across search, YouTube, and open web advertising. The first two were growing very well, but general web open advertising has been shrinking. And this could be due to a host of different reasons, but it makes us at least consider the hypothesis that non-video display advertising is underperforming video content like YouTube or search content. There are other things that you need to be careful of in reviewing these types of reports. One is that the biggest companies, at least through the last few years, have been outperforming the overall market for a number of years. In other words, if you only looked at the biggest public companies, you'll have a warped sense for how well the industry is doing and the pricing dynamics. So, in summary, for the source of information, public companies, the strength is that they have actual performance data. The weakness is that it only comes out every 3 months, and it's going to be aggregate data, and not all companies, especially those that aren't public, have to report. Let's turn our attention to the third set of pricing information, which is buyer behaviors. And now we get to the first set of information that is not available to the general public. It is buy-side information from your own operations. And by that, what do I mean? If you're a digital publisher and you're in the group that's focused on making that money, all of your focus is likely on how can you make more money from your ads. You probably don't even give much thought to your own marketing department. But in all likelihood, you have a marketing group who is trying to promote your own brand. They may be working with agencies, they are running campaigns, they likely have information about the prices that they are paying for media. In all likelihood, when you reach out to them, you may find that at first the information that they can give you is not that useful. Or they may say that their spend is going towards one major source, say Facebook or Amazon. Or maybe they are running mostly on TV and have limited digital spend. However, don't give up. In all likelihood, they could redeploy some of their campaigns in such a way as to provide you more useful information. For example, running innovation or test budgets in areas that you're interested in learning some of the dynamics about. With this source of information in particular, I would caution you to get advice from your own internal legal department to ensure that you're operating in consistent manner with your own practices and how your partners expect you to engage with them. Some companies have concerns about using buying behavior for your own benefit. So check with your legal department. And again, let's recap the strengths and weaknesses. The strength of buying behavior from your marketing department is that you're using real data. The weakness is that you are limited by what your marketing department can and will do for you. Let's turn our attention to source number 4. This is what I'm going to call anecdotal advertiser and agency feedback. This is when an advertiser or an agency tells you, or likely someone in your sales group, your prices are too high. We can get that same advertising inventory at lower prices elsewhere. In many respects, this is the least trustworthy source that we will discuss because the advertiser has no incentive to tell you if the prices are too low. However, they may still tell you that they're not low enough. It doesn't mean that it can't be a good source of information. And so let's talk about how to get good information out of these conversations. Firstly, in my experience, the agencies are going to be a more reliable source of data than individual advertisers. This is because, frankly, they have less incentive to lie. They aren't directly impacted by the price changes of your media, and they're going to see more campaigns. Another piece of advice is not to ask the advertiser about individual prices. Instead, ask them about other dynamics associated with the campaigns, leading questions like, it seems like we used to be a bigger part of your budget and now we're dropping. What's going on? Or ask them about performance. Marketers love to talk about inventory and what's performing and what's not. And often they will give you insights into the campaigns and how you're performing relative to your competition. And in this way, you can back into the pricing dynamics. The other thing that you can do here is check pricing structure rather than absolute levels. And by that, what I mean is you may be able to get feedback from an advertiser who says things like, by the way, did you guys know that you're the only ones in the industry who are charging based on cost of media? Everybody else is charging on a CPM basis. Getting feedback like that can be absolutely gold. So before I summarize, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you can get updates as I bring out new content. Now let's look at the strengths and weaknesses of each of the 4 different groups. Again, the measurement companies, strong where it's a reliable and consistent form of data. Often they have systematic biases that the user isn't aware of. The company earnings strength is that it's actual performance data. The weakness is that it only comes out every 3 months and not all companies have to report. And when they do, it may be only at an aggregate level. In terms of buying behavior from your own marketing team, the strength is, again, you're looking at real data, not estimates. The weakness is that it's limited by what your marketing department can do for you. And then finally, the advertiser and agency feedback. As we discussed, potentially the least trustworthy because it's going to be biased in one direction, but it has a strength that you're getting that feedback directly from the customer. So in the end of the day, you're going to have to use all 4 of these sources to varying degrees, and you have to use your judgment as to how. I hope this content has been useful as you're thinking about how to constantly monitor the pricing changes in the industry over time. Thanks.